Have you ever wondered about the fate of those who orchestrated the most infamous trial in history? Picture this. It's a chilly night in Jerusalem, the air thick with tension. In the shadows, a group of men gather, their faces etched with determination and fear. These aren't just any men. They're the religious elite of Israel, and they're about to set in motion a chain of events that will echo through eternity. At the center of this conspiracy are two figures, Annas and Caiaphas. Their names might not be as familiar as Pontius Pilate's, but their roles in the condemnation of Jesus Christ were pivotal. These priests, meant to be the spiritual shepherds of God's people, instead became the architects of the Messiah's execution. But what became of these men after that fateful night? Did they simply fade into the annals of history, or did divine justice catch up with them? The story of their downfall is as tragic as it is profound, a testament to the words of Scripture, "Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows," Galatians 6:7. As we unravel this tale of power, corruption, and ultimate judgment, we'll see how the very institution these men sought to protect crumbled around them. It's a stark reminder that no one is beyond the reach of God's justice, not even those who wear the robes of religious authority. Let's pull back the curtain on one of the most influential figures in Jerusalem at the time of Jesus. Annas, picture a man in his 60s, his beard streaked with gray, eyes sharp with cunning. Though he no longer held the official title of high priest, make no mistake, Annas was the true power behind the temple's golden doors. Appointed high priest by the Romans in 6 AD, Annas had been deposed after just 9 years. But did that stop him? Not in the least. He managed to install 5 of his sons and his son-in-law, Caiaphas, as high priests in succession. Talk about keeping it in the family. Annas was like a spider at the center of a vast web of influence and corruption. The Bible gives us a glimpse of his power in John 18:13. They brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Why bring Jesus to Annas first? Because everyone knew Annas called the shots. This man had turned the temple into a lucrative business. Remember Jesus overturning the tables of the money changers? That was Annas' operation. He had a monopoly on selling sacrificial animals and changing foreign currency, both essential for temple worship. Imagine the fury he must have felt when Jesus disrupted his cash cow. Annas saw Jesus as a threat, not just to his religious authority, but to his economic empire. When he looked at the Messiah, he didn't see the Son of God, he saw a danger to his power and wealth. It's a chilling reminder of how the love of money can blind even those in the highest religious offices. As we delve deeper into this story, keep Annas in mind. His behind-the-scenes machinations set the stage for one of history's greatest injustices. And as we'll see, his actions would have consequences far beyond what he could have imagined. Now let's turn our attention to Caiaphas, the man who held the official title of high priest during Jesus' trial. Imagine a figure draped in ornate robes, adorned with the breastplate of judgment, his head crowned with the priestly turban. This was Caiaphas, the visible face of Israel's religious leadership. Caiaphas served as high priest from 18 to 36 AD, an unusually long tenure that speaks to his political savvy. He was Annas' son-in-law, handpicked to carry out the will of his powerful father-in-law, while maintaining a facade of religious authority. The Gospel of John gives us a chilling insight into Caiaphas' mindset. In John 11:49-50 we read, "But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, 'You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish.'" These words reveal Caiaphas as a cold, calculating political operator. He saw Jesus not as a spiritual figure, but as a threat to the delicate balance of power between the Jewish leadership and their Roman overlords. In his mind, sacrificing one man, even an innocent one, was a small price to pay for maintaining the status quo. But there's a tragic irony in Caiaphas' statement. Without realizing it, he had prophesied the very purpose of Christ's death, to die for the people. As John points out, he did not say this of his own accord, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation. John 51. Caiaphas, the man meant to be God's representative to the people, became instead the instrument of humanity's rejection of God's Son. He abandoned his sacred duty to pursue justice and truth, choosing instead to preserve his own power and position. As we continue our journey through this dark chapter of history, remember Caiaphas. His actions serve as a stark warning about the dangers of putting political expediency above moral integrity, especially for those in positions of spiritual leadership. Picture this. It's the dead of night in Jerusalem. The air is thick with tension. As Jesus is dragged before the Sanhedrin, the Jewish high court, this isn't just any trial. It's a mockery of justice that will go down in history as one of the most egregious miscarriages of justice ever committed. Let's break down why this trial was so blatantly illegal. First, Jewish law prohibited trials at night. Yet, as we read in Mark 14:53-65, Jesus was brought before the council under the cover of darkness. They were in such a rush to condemn him that they couldn't even wait for daybreak. Second, the Sanhedrin was not allowed to initiate charges against the accused. But here they were, actively seeking false testimony against Jesus. Matthew 26:59 tells us. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. Third, in capital cases, a verdict of guilty was not allowed to be reached on the same day as the trial, yet they condemned Jesus within hours of his arrest. Fourth, the high priest was forbidden from tearing his robes, yet Caiaphas did exactly that in a dramatic display of faux outrage. As we read in Matthew 26:65, then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has spoken blasphemy." Perhaps most damning of all, the Sanhedrin met in the high priest's house, not in the designated hall of hewn stones where official proceedings were to take place. This wasn't a trial. It was a lynching disguised as legal procedure. Annas and Caiaphas, along with the rest of the Sanhedrin, trampled over their own laws in their haste to eliminate Jesus. The irony is palpable. These men, who prided themselves on their meticulous adherence to the law, broke nearly every rule in the book to condemn the very one who had come to fulfill the law. As we reflect on this travesty of justice, we are reminded of Jesus' words in Matthew 23:28. "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness." The sun had set on that fateful Friday and Jerusalem was plunged into an uneasy quiet. Annas and Caiaphas might have thought their problems were over, but they couldn't have been more wrong. The aftermath of the crucifixion brought a whirlwind of unexpected consequences that shook the very foundations of their power. First came the supernatural signs. Matthew 27:51 tells us, "At that moment the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook. The rocks split." Imagine the shock and terror of the priests as they witnessed the holy veil separating the Holy of Holies, ripping apart without human intervention. This was more than a coincidence. It was a divine statement that access to God was no longer restricted to the privileged few. Then there was the matter of the missing body. Despite posting guards at the tomb, Jesus' body disappeared. The priest's desperate attempt to cover up the resurrection by bribing the soldiers, Matthew 28:11-15, only added to the growing whispers and doubts among the people. But perhaps the most immediate threat to Annas and Caiaphas came from the rapidly growing community of believers. Acts 2:41 records that about 3,000 people were baptized on the day of Pentecost alone. This new movement, proclaiming Jesus as the risen Messiah, was gaining momentum right under their noses. The priests found themselves in a precarious position. They had hoped to silence Jesus, but now his followers were boldly preaching in the temple courts. Acts 4:1-2 says, "The priests and the captain of the temple guard and the Sadducees came up to Peter and John while they were speaking to the people. They were greatly disturbed because the apostles were teaching the people, proclaiming in Jesus the resurrection of the dead. Their attempts to intimidate the apostles backfired spectacularly. When they ordered Peter and John to stop preaching, they received this resolute response: "Judge for yourselves whether it is right in God's sight to obey you rather than God. For we cannot help speaking about what we have seen and heard." Acts 4:19-20. The very thing Annas and Caiaphas had feared was coming to pass. Their authority was being challenged not by Roman swords, but by the unstoppable message of the gospel. The tide was turning, and the once powerful priests were about to learn a hard lesson. You can't fight against God and expect to win. Fast forward about 40 years from the crucifixion. The tension in Jerusalem is palpable, like a powder keg ready to explode. The Jewish people, chafing under Roman rule, are on the brink of rebellion. Little do they know they're about to witness the fulfillment of a chilling prophecy made by Jesus himself. Remember when Jesus said, "Do you see all these great buildings? Not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down." Mark 13:2. The disciples must have been shocked. The temple, after all, was the pride of Jerusalem, a marvel of architecture and the center of Jewish religious life. How could it possibly fall? But in 66 AD, the powder keg ignites. The Jews revolt against Rome, and the empire strikes back with brutal force. 4 years later, in 70 AD, the Roman general Titus besieges Jerusalem. The city falls, and with it, the magnificent temple. Picture the scene. Flames engulfing the sacred precincts, soldiers tearing down stone after stone, the screams of the defeated mixing with the triumphant shouts of the conquerors. The golden vessels of the temple are carried off as trophies of war, displayed in Titus' victory parade in Rome. This wasn't just a military defeat, it was a theological catastrophe. The temple, believed to be God's dwelling place on earth, was gone. The sacrificial system, the priesthood, the very center of Jewish religious life, all wiped out in one fell swoop. What must Annas and Caiaphas have thought if they lived to see this day? Their worst fears had come true, but not in the way they expected. They had condemned Jesus to protect their position and prevent Roman intervention. Yet here were the Romans destroying everything they had sought to preserve. The words of Jesus in Matthew 23:37-38 ring with prophetic power. "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing. Look, your house is left to you desolate." The fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple marked the end of an era. The old system which Annas and Caiaphas had corrupted and exploited was gone. In its place, a new covenant was spreading across the known world, one not bound by temples made with hands, but written on human hearts. As we reflect on this cataclysmic event, we're reminded of the words in Hebrews 12:27-28. The words, once more, indicate the removing of what can be shaken, that is, created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful, and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe. As we draw our narrative to a close, let's turn our attention to the ultimate fate of these two men who played such pivotal roles in the condemnation of Jesus. The Bible doesn't give us explicit details about their final days, but historical records and tradition provide some intriguing insights. Annas, the puppet master behind the scenes, is said to have lived to a ripe old age. Some accounts suggest he died around 40 AD, about a decade after the crucifixion of Jesus. If this is accurate, he would have witnessed the explosive growth of the early church, a movement he had tried so desperately to stamp out. Imagine the frustration and perhaps even fear he must have felt as he saw the followers of Jesus multiplying daily, boldly proclaiming the resurrection in the very temple courts he once controlled. As for Caiaphas, his fall from power came much sooner. In 36 AD, just a few years after the crucifixion, he was deposed by the Roman governor Vitellius. Picture the scene. Caiaphas, once robed in priestly splendor, now stripped of his office and authority. The man who had torn his garments in mock outrage at Jesus' claims was now truly in tatters, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. But the story doesn't end there. According to an intriguing discovery in 1990, archaeologists uncovered what they believed to be the family tomb of Caiaphas in Jerusalem. Among the ossuaries, or bone boxes found, was one inscribed with the name Joseph, son of Caiaphas, likely referring to the very Caiaphas who presided over Jesus' trial. If authentic, this finding provides a tangible link to this infamous figure from history. Yet what strikes us most is not the physical remains, but the spiritual legacy of these men. They had held the highest religious offices, stood in the presence of the long-awaited Messiah, and tragically missed the greatest opportunity in human history. Their names are now forever linked with betrayal, corruption, and the rejection of God's Son. As we reflect on their tragic end, we're reminded of Jesus' words in Matthew 16:26. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Annas and Caiaphas had wealth, power, and prestige, but in rejecting Jesus, they lost everything that truly mattered. Their story serves as a sobering warning about the dangers of spiritual blindness and the pursuit of worldly power at the expense of divine truth. It challenges us to examine our own hearts and ask, are we like Annas and Caiaphas, so focused on maintaining our position or reputation that we miss the transforming presence of Christ in our midst? In the end, the tale of Annas and Caiaphas reminds us that no earthly power can stand against God's purposes. Their efforts to silence Jesus only serve to fulfill prophecy and usher in the new covenant. As we close this chapter of history, let's take to heart the words of Galatians 6:7-8. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life.